of all, thank you everyone for joining us. I know we have an audience from different backgrounds today, so allow me to go a little bit deeper sometimes, a little bit less deeper on other times, so that we can cover everyone's background and everyone's knowledge and things. The chat box will remain open if anyone has, I hope this doesn't keep popping in and out. I hope everyone can feel free to share their questions in the chat box whenever they feel like there's anything that they want to ask about. I'll try to address as much questions as possible at the end of the webinar. I already saw the questions that some of you have sent, so thank you so much for that. The questions can vary from what is autism to a variety of different topics, so I'm not sure I'll be able to cover everything, but I will definitely be able to share answers to the questions related most to our topic. And a second thing, excuse my voice and my seasonal energy. There might be a couple of sneezes here and there, a couple of coughs, but hopefully other than that, everything should remain clear. Okay, and we are ready to go. So today's topic is Beyond Words, a neuro-affirming approach to supporting autistic communicators. Obviously, we put communicators because we focus mostly on children, but we should not be forgetting that we have adolescents, we have adults as well who are on the autistic spectrum, that we should also take their needs and their concerns into consideration. Before we start, I want to invite you to think of a scenario with me. I want you to think on a day you are going to work where you are late, you are stuck in traffic, you did not get a good enough sleep the past night, and you got to work, versus a day where you are excited to go to work, you got enough sleep, you had your morning coffee, there was no traffic whatsoever, schools were on a break or something, you got there. And I want you to compare how your, we're going to call it mood for now, but we're going to change that word in a bit, how your mood is at work, how productive you are, how efficient you are at work. Now, we're going to replace that word mood with the word regulated. And we're going to talk a lot about regulation, sensory regulation, and just overall body regulation in a bit, and how important it is to tackle it as therapists, but also how important it is to understand it as parents, as teachers, teachers' assistants, LSAs. We have psychologists with us. We have OTs with us. We have a lot of people from different backgrounds, parents, grandparents. So I hope everyone can get a bit of the information that we're going to be sharing today. All right, and now we're going to go. So first of all, communication beyond speech. There is something that I personally don't like, which is every time someone talks about speech therapy specifically, for some reason, if you go ahead and Google speech therapy, actually, I took a photo for you, this is what we get. And for the speech therapist here with us in this webinar, I'm sure they're also facepalming, because I have no idea why our job is reduced to showing letters to children and I don't know what they're doing, what else they're doing. This is obviously not what we do in the therapy room, and this is definitely not what we don't do with autistic children. For some reason, we have reduced speech therapy to the word speech, which is articulation mostly, which is kind of 5% of what we do. And this is like the fastest, easiest type of therapy that just takes a couple of weeks, maybe a month, couple of months, and then it's done. However, our work mostly consists on the word communication and not just the word speech. So maybe we should change speech therapist to communication therapist. I think that would make it more, exhaustive and includes everything that we do. And a better photo actually to what we do might be like this. It was so rare to find actually someone playing with a child that we have to take it from Shutterstock. We couldn't actually find a more common photo to use. But this photo, I believe, represents a bit more the goal of the therapy that we do and the goal of communication in general that we should be doing with autistic children, okay? So communication beyond speech, when we're talking about things that are different and not just speech related, which is the words that we say or the sounds that we make, one very important thing is AAC. For those who don't know what AAC is, it's alternative and augmentative communication, okay? So when we're talking about AAC, and for the people who work in school, AAC is not just the iPad, okay? Anything that we do with our face, with our body, with our nonverbal communication as well, It seems that I'm going to keep hiding this one. Okay, all of this is AAC. The signs that we use, the facial mimics that we use, the tone that we use, the body language that we use, written language, all of this is support for communication, which is augmentative. In some cases, it's also alternative. If you think of Stephen Hawking, for example, they have built them a whole device that he can manipulate, for example, with his eyes. This is completely alternative communication because he is nonverbal, so they had to replace the way he communicates with an alternative device. In that case, that was that specific device. The iPad, in this case, or the applications that we use on the iPad can be either augmentative or alternative, depending on the child's level of communication. It's either replacing the language if he has no access whatsoever to verbal communication, or as a support for communication. Okay, so I just wanted to clear that out because we're going to talk a lot about AAC later on, and I wanted to make sure that everyone knows what AAC is and that it's not just the iPad. Okay. Another thing that we're going to tackle, which is what we're not really going to tackle, but another type of communication that is not just speech, is also written expression, whether it is writing or reading. This is also another type of communication. Echolalia, which is extremely important in the case of our autistic kids. This is also a type of communication, and it's important to look at it as communication and not just as a behavior that I need to stop or extinguish, as some of our colleagues use the term. It's important that we focus on echolalia and where's the echolalia coming from. For those who don't know what echolalia is when the child is repeating a certain word or repeating a certain sentence or an expression or a song that is not necessarily that he learned from a song or someone else who said it to him, a TV show, whatever it is, the origin of that word or sentence, but he's using it sometimes repetitively, sometimes immediately, sometimes on another day, on another week. But it's also important to see what the child is actually trying to say, what they're trying to communicate with that echolalia. Okay. Body language and facial mimics. If I'm frowning, if I'm facing you, if I'm crossing my arms, all of these are also communication that is not speech technically. And most importantly, and one of the things that we're going to talk mostly about today is behavior. Our behavior is also communication, and I'm sure all the behavior therapists who are with us today and BCBAs can agree that the child communicates through their behaviors, and this is something that we need to focus on a lot to try to understand and to try to see where the behavior is coming from so that we can support the child. Okay, so all these are ways to communicate that are not technically speech. So why go beyond words? Why that title? All right, it seems I'm gonna keep hiding that little thing that's gonna pop, which is completely fine. Okay, all right, so why go beyond words? Well, first of all, just because, as we just said, communication is not just speech, but also because many autistic individuals, many autistic children communicate in diverse ways. And not just autistic kids, obviously, but today the focus is gonna be autistic kids, because obviously we are in the Autism Acceptance Month, and we're gonna talk a little bit in a little bit why it's Autism Acceptance Month and not Autism Awareness Month anymore. Okay, so our autistic kids communicate in diverse ways. Some of the ways that we just mentioned, whether it is be the behavior or the echolalia or the written language or the facial mimics or the AAC or whatever it is. So we need to be quite aware of different types of communication. Our role is to honor, support, and expand those ways. Our role is not to force children to communicate with words if they're not yet ready, if this is not their preferred method of communication. Our role is to communicate with them and have them be engaged in communication. Words will be just the cherry on top if you want. Words may come later, may not come, depending on the child, depending on their level of if you want the mental capacity for them to communicate specifically with words or to understand words, that's just a side note in this case, but how important it is for them to communicate is what really matters in this moment. So we're going to talk about neuroaffirming. I know it's been the trend a bit lately for people who are in the major, but what is really neuroaffirming, and is my therapy as a therapist, is my approach as a teacher, is my communication as a parent, all of these, are they neuroaffirming? So what is neuroaffirming? Please, let's understand that it's not being kind, okay? So Neuro-affirming doesn't mean that I'm kind to the child, I let them do whatever they want, I'm just being mindful about how they are, what they're doing. This is not what neuro-affirming is, okay? Here's the allergy. Okay, excuse my little break. It's mostly respect for neurological differences as natural variations, okay? I want to focus on two words here, which is neurological and natural. Neurological, it means that the child is not doing it on purpose. They're not misbehaving on purpose. It is not something that they can control. It is not something that they can choose to do or not to do, okay? This is a neurological behavior or neurological way of communicating, and there are different ways to communicate or to exist, okay? That are different neurological types, if we want, and we need to be able to respect those differences as natural variations. The word natural here is very important because I hear a lot about a behavior that is not quote unquote normal, behavior that is atypical, a behavior that is not accepted, let's say. But what is really normal? Who said what normal is? Who said that avoiding eye contact is not normal? Who said that preferring a certain game is not normal behavior? Who put these rules? It's important to understand that we have different variations of what's natural and what's again, normal, and it's important to respect these differences. So it's basically moving away from fixing a child or a communicator to empowering them. And the word fixing here is very important because a lot of times I noticed that our need to fix a child comes from our need of having them communicate with us with the way we want them to communicate. I really apologize for my cough. We need to be able to understand that the child is not broken to fix it, to fix him, her, it, they. But it's important to know that they have a different way of communicating, and it's our job as whatever we are, whatever the relationship that we have to them, is to empower it. Prioritizing lived experiences and self-advocacy. Self-advocacy is a really, 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 really important term here. When we are talking about allowing the child to say no from time to time, it's important because this is what the child is really asking for at the moment. Teaching the child to say, I'm fine when you ask them, how are you today? And the answer has to always be, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm okay. This is not self-advocacy. The child might not be okay on that day. The child might not be fine. Giving them options about expressing how they're feeling, saying no when they want to, respecting the power dynamic that we have over them. And this is a very important notion here, that most of the time we feel that we have an upper hand in the way that we are dealing with the children just because we are sometimes physically more powerful, sometimes, let's say, on an environmental perspective, we are more dominant, and we don't let the child express themselves and self-advocate for themselves because it's easier for us to handle it that way. So it's important to self-advocate for children because this is what neuroaffirming is all about. Lastly, rejecting harmful behavior compliance models. I know some behavior therapists here are gonna jump in. Please feel free to ask any question, any confusion, anything that you want in the chat box. I'm gonna try my best to answer all of them. But when we're talking about compliance models, we're talking about rewarding system and forcing the child to behave or to communicate in a certain way. All recent researchers have proven that rewarding system decrease intrinsic motivation for the child, and for the child to learn and to be able to receive information, whether academically or day-to-day information, they have to be intrinsically motivated. The motivation has to come from within and not from a certain reward that they are promised to get. Okay, I know you might tell me everything in life is kind of reward based. I know I go to work because I'm getting certain satisfaction from work. I'm getting my salary at the end of the month. I'm doing 1, 2, 3. I know I don't know, work out at the gym to have a certain body, to do this, to do that. Everything that I'm doing has some kind of reward in it, but the motivation is still intrinsic. No one is forcing me to do it to reward me with something else. And this is the difference. Okay. All right, let's continue. So this is what neuro affirming is all about. Now, let's talk about it in practice, in our daily life, in our clinic, in the school, at home. It's about fostering autonomy over prompting, okay? I don't want to force the child to say something. I want him spontaneously to say something to me, okay? Creating safe, low-demand communication environments. This can be as simple as not forcing them to stay on a chair and to do an activity sitting down, as simple as that. This can be as simple as making sure that the child trusts you, making sure that the child is comfortable, is safe around you, they feel they can communicate with you, as simple as that. Recognizing stimming as regulation, not disruption. We're going to talk a lot about regulation in a bit, but I know I get a lot of complaint about kids stimming. And for those of you who don't know what stimming is, it can be a repetitive movement or word or something that the child is doing usually to regulate themselves. Who between you doesn't have their own regulation method? I, for one, sometimes bite my nails. I know people who like their knees going up and down when they're nervous or when they're anxious about something. Some people listen to music. Some people play Friends in the background when they had a bad day while they're having dinner. These are ways that we regulate ourselves. Stimming is one of the ways that the child would use, or we would use to regulate ourselves. If we block it, first of all, that's not going to solve the issue. The child is still going to stim, so it's not going to stop that behavior. But most importantly, the child's only focus is going to be on stopping his stimming because you asked him to, and the focus cannot be on communication anymore because he cannot do both. Sometimes they need to stim, they need to regulate their dysregulation in order for them to be completely in communication with us as therapists or teachers or parents. So it's not a disruption. We just need to know how to channel it in a way that supports communication rather than, oh, he's disturbing his friends in the classroom, or he keeps doing that all day long. What do I do? And all the complaints that sometimes we get from stimming. All right. And also, it's also validating all forms of communication. We talked about AAC, about gestures, about scripts. I think they kind of are actually all fall in AAC because AAC can cover any type of other than speech type of communication. So focusing on supporting all communication styles, that would mean modeling AAC use daily for kids who are using AAC or who needs AAC. Studies have also showed us that if we limit the use of AAC just for the therapy room, we are not progressing the way we want to progress. The progress is quite slow. So modeling AAC use daily. I know I have some questions also about that in the emails I received in the forms. We're going to answer them in a bit. That means having whatever tool the child is needing, whether it's sign language, whether it's a Makaton, whether it's a picture, whether it is a device, whether it's an iPad or not an iPad, whether it is any type of communication style that is under the AAC umbrella, modeling that use daily so that we can offer a chance for the child to communicate more comfortably and more frequently. That also means celebrating all communication attempts and not just the ones that we want or we asked for or we prompted. Sorry, I missed one. And that also means to use the preferred method of communication for that child, whether it is texting, visuals, objects, in the case where the child is nonverbal, of course. And it also means respecting response time and avoiding pressure. A lot of times I see whether therapists or teachers or whoever's dealing with a child, they ask a question. Within 3 seconds, they ask another question. They give the child another prompt. They put another demand on them. And this kind of just blocks the reaction for the child. It's always important to give time for the child to respond. You don't know what the child's latency time is, how much time they need to process an information. So always allow a bit of time for them to process the information you gave them and avoid pressuring them. The senses in sensory needs. We obviously all know our 5 lovely senses. So we have the sight, the hearing, the smell, the taste, the touch, but we also have a 6th sense, which is not just our intuition, but it's also our vestibular sense, which is all about the balance and the movement. It's what keeps me balanced. It's what makes me realize where my head is at the moment. Is it tilted? Is it not tilted? How am I sitting on the chair? Am I about to fall down? How do I balance myself? And this is very important for all the children who are constantly spinning around, who are constantly jumping up and down, who are constantly spinning stuff around. This is sensory seeking, their vestibular senses. And we're going to talk about how we regulate these things later on and how we support the child when this happens. We also have the proprioception, which is our body awareness. I now know that I am sitting on the chair, I'm leaning my back on the chair, my hand is on the laptop, my other hand is on my chest, and I am aware of how my body is. Even if I close my eyes, I can still detect how my body is. Okay, so this is the proprioception. And the last one, which also we kind of ignore most of the time, which is our interoception. So these are the internal sensing. When you feel your heartbeat, your emotions, your thirst, your hunger, when you're feeling sick, when you're feeling cold, when you're feeling in pain, okay? So these are our main 8 senses, and it's important to be aware of all of them, because children or autistic communicators or anyone with sensory needs will try to seek or try to the opposite, avoid all these 8 senses and not just the 5 senses. So when we talk about sensory regulation, we're talking about our ability to process sensory information and adjust our levels of arousal, attention, and responsiveness. When we're talking about arousal, we're talking about our alertness, our attentiveness. Okay, so it's our ability to process that information and adjust it so that we are in constant regulation. Some activities may increase our alertness or the child's alertness, and while others might decrease it. Some of them might increase it, and up to a certain point, they start decreasing it. Some activities, I'll give you a simple example. A child who wants to play on the trampoline. Maybe 2 to 5 minutes on the trampoline is enough for the child to regulate. More than that, they are in dysregulation again. So it's also important to work with the occupational therapist and try to understand the sensory profile of the child or with someone trained in sensory regulation to know the level of the type of sensory information that the child needs, how much of it, what is their preferred let's say a sensory seeking way, what do they do, what do they not do, what do they avoid, what do they seek, so that we are able to help them regulate themselves, because this is the only way we can get them to learn. In order to be able to be in what we call the optimal learning zone, we have to be constantly regulated, whether it's them, the children, or us as well in our daily life. So what about you? If you want to think of one sensation that you really love, take 10 seconds, try to think of something that you really love to feel. What is one sensation that bothers you? For me, it's this blazer, but I have to keep it on for the sake of the webinar. Which sensory system are they, that's a typing mistake, are they processed by? Is it something you love to smell? Is it something you love to hear? It's a certain song. Is it Coldplay? Is it something you like to touch? Is it something that bothers you if it touches you? Is it maybe the tag on the t-shirt? Wool. Some people like to wear silk. They don't like to, whatever it is. We also have sensations that we love, sensations that we don't like at all. And understand our own sensory system is essential. First, to sympathize, but also to be able to support other people's regulations. And this isn't just about the children. It's important for us to understand what dysregulates us, because if I'm also entering a session and I'm dysregulated by the amount of noise that is outside the therapy room, by the light that is too bright, by a certain smell. The second I entered this room, there was a smell coming from like this machine that you plug and it gives you a certain smell. It dysregulates me so bad that the second I enter a room, I have to turn it off. I have to regulate myself so that I'm in my optimal focus zone, alertness, okay? And it's also important because it helps us sympathize with other people, especially our children. It helps us understand them. When the child is hitting, when the child is biting, when the child is constantly spinning, when the child is stimming, all these are sensory needs that the child is trying to seek or cover to regulate himself, because they're obviously in dysregulation. And understanding that only will help us regulate them and support them in order for them to communicate better, but also to be better students in the classroom, if this is where they are at the moment. All right, let's continue. Sensory needs and communication. So why it matters, we kind of covered that. Sensory processing differences can affect regulation, focus, and communication. We need to be regulated to be in our optimal learning zone. Keep that in mind. Understanding each system helps us tailor environments and interactions supportively. Understanding what the child needs, what they don't need, what they need a bit of, what they need a lot of, helps us understand how to tailor the environment that they are working in, playing in, sleeping in, living in, eating in, and that helps us support the interactions that we're having with them. Now, we are speech therapists, but when we talk about speech, what we really want to talk about is communication, as we said. So communication is more important than just speaking. But before that, we also have engagement. I'm going to give the example of me in the therapy room with a child, but that applies to a parent with their kids at home, a teacher with a student in the classroom. Before communicating with the child, you need to engage with them. Okay. And when you communicate, you're going to get the speech. But before that, you need to engage with them. You need to interact with them. You need to, as we said earlier, create a safe environment, create a way or a place or a feeling that the child is comfortable in so that you can get communication and that you can get speech. But before the engagement and before the interaction, we have regulation. If the child is dysregulating, when the child is entering the therapy room dysregulated, screaming, they didn't have time to have their lunch, they were stuck in traffic, the noise, the visuals, whatever it is, they're wearing a shirt they don't like, they smelled something they didn't like, any reason whatsoever that dysregulates them will affect the engagement, will affect their communication, and will affect their speech, obviously, if they are at that level. Okay, so it's important to start with regulation and then the rest will follow. And that applies to you too. You have to be regulated in order to interact with people in the best optimal way, let's say, and in order to communicate with them. All right. Now, one thing that is very interesting that I really like to talk about is the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain and the dysregulation and what it affects. So we have the upstairs brain, which is our cerebral cortex, which is the frontal lobe here, that is in charge of thinking, body control, play, empathy, planning, strategy making, learning, talking, all of that. And we have our downstairs brain, which is the limbic system and the amygdala. This part is in charge of breathing, but yes, not just breathing, really all the bodily functions, if you want, so your heartbeat, everything, breathing included, swallowing, blinking, which are the things that we don't necessarily think about, but it's also in charge of the fight or flight or freeze or fawn, the 4 Fs really of our reaction to a certain event. It's also in charge of our survival instincts. It's also in charge of our emotions. Okay. When the child is dysregulated, and please focus on this, when the child is dysregulated, they are stuck in their downstairs brain. They are in survival mode. Okay. When you are there, you are not able to go to your upstairs brain and learn and be in effective communication with someone else. Try to talk to a child who's screaming and having a tantrum. This is not the time to do it, okay? Unless the child comes down, unless he's regulated again, then he may access his upstairs brain and then do the other logic thinking and functions that we are asking from him. But when even us, if you are, I don't know, scared, if something happened, you're traumatized, there's whatever event that kind of led you to go more to your downstairs brain, this is not the time for you to be completely regulated and taking very logic decisions and things that are important for your, let's say, academic skills or whatsoever. Okay. All right. I'm glad that we have people joining us, but I apologize for the constant distraction. If you're seeing this on the screen, I apologize. All right, let's continue. So understanding the link between the sensory link and what do we basically need to do in that case. So we need to identify triggers and support regulation. Okay, how do we identify triggers? Well, I mean, if you know the child enough, you'll start understanding what triggers them, and not just the child. If you know your partner enough, you know what triggers them. If you know your kid enough, if you know your parents enough, if you know your colleague enough, your friend, you also start understanding what triggers them and what regulates them and how to support that regulation. But for a more scientific way, if you want, of doing that, we need to fill what we call a sensory profile that usually the OT or someone specialized in sensory regulation as well can fill. This is something that we do at the beginning of a consultation to try to understand the behaviors of the child and where they're coming from and what makes them dysregulated so that we can support them better in the therapy session. It also means to use, here I just named a couple of examples: fidgets, noise cancelling, headphones, quiet spaces. I have a friend who puts sunglasses in concerts. That's also a way to regulate themselves and not be overwhelmed with here in this case, it's visual sense, okay? But it can be anything. We mentioned the 8 senses. Any of them can be disrupting, any of them can be dysregulating. And depending on what triggers the child, we need to find an alternative or a way to kind of reduce that dysregulation for them to be a bit more comfortable in the way they are, okay? That also means maybe sometimes having them sit on a spinning chair or having them sit on a bouncing ball. That also means that sometimes they're not necessarily sitting on a chair on a table in my therapy room. Sometimes they are on a mat. Sometimes they are on the yoga ball. Sometimes they are just sometimes they are barefoot, sometimes, so it depends on what the child actually needs and how we can support those needs to get them to be as regulated as possible. That also means respecting sensory differences and not suppressing them because we feel like it, because it's better for us, because it's more comfortable for us when they are not doing a certain behavior that certain behavior might be triggering us. And it's important to understand that as parents and as, again, I'm going to talk about the power dynamic, as people who are a bit more, quote unquote, powerful than the child, but they are more dominant than the child. And we need to understand what the child is doing. Why is it bothering me? Why is it dysregulating me? Why is it affecting me? And how can I deal with that so that I'm able to handle their dysregulation, okay? So regulating myself before handling someone else who's dysregulated, all right? But also, it's about respecting that need. It's about understanding that need, and it's about knowing where it's coming from and what to do about it. So this is where family and community and teacher and the neighbor and everyone who's around that child come for support. So we need to always focus on educating and empowering families with neuro-affirming strategies. Okay, not just being kind, but being understanding of the differences in the neuro typical or atypical, quote unquote, processing of the child's brain. Encouraging respect for all communication. Speech is the cherry on top in some cases, but communication is not just about speech. So please keep that in mind as well. Include families in AAC training and implementation. As we said, it's important to use AAC in the therapy room, but it's quite limiting if we just use it in the therapy room. I'm seeing the child, 2 times a week, 3 times a week tops for 45 minutes, an hour tops. They're spending the rest of the time either in school, either in at home, at the park, wherever the child spends their time. It's important to have access to whatever communication method they prefer. Build community understanding, what we're doing right now, support groups, resources, refer parents to people who are specialized in, let's say, autism or in general, supporting children who are on the spectrum. And finally, it's important to understand that we need to integrate meaningful accommodation and not just accommodations, okay? So accommodations that truly support and not just, oh, I know, so I have a child who's on the spectrum. Let me just, I don't know, give them a headphone. Let me just give them PECs. Let me just give them whatever I have as an information about children and what they need. This might not be appropriate for this specific child. There are no 2 autistic children that are the same and have the same communication needs or sensory regulation needs. So it's important to tailor my accommodations to the child and to what they specifically need. That means also flexible schedules, reducing verbal demands, or at least pausing, giving them time to process the verbal demand, having visual schedules if the child prefers it, choice boards, if the child have difficulty understanding, let's say, an auditory information, having visual supports helps. But again, it depends on the child and it depends on their needs. Predictable routines and transitions, if the child suffers with routine and transitions, and allowing scripting, echolalia, or silence. Silence is also important. Silence is also communication. You don't have to feel awkward in the session if the child is not saying anything. Sometimes we need to give them a bit of time to process the information, or for them to take the initiative, for them to take the initiative to communicate spontaneously. It doesn't always have to be a response to something that the adult is saying, or their friend is saying, or their mom or the teacher. Okay, we need to also understand that being silent is also an opportunity for the child to find their voice. If I'm talking to him all the time, they're not gonna be taking any initiative. They're barely gonna have time to answer me. So it's important to keep that in mind. So let's rethink our goals. What are we really aiming for? And if the answer is for the child to be normal, this is the wrong webinar for you. We're going to shift from normalizing to connecting, okay? And keep that in mind, no matter who you are to that child. Focusing on autonomy and not compliance. We need the child to be independent. We need the child to be able to self-advocate. And we don't need a child who's compliant, who's trained, who is well-behaved, but not communicating, okay? And it's important to understand that and support the person, not just the method. Takeaway thoughts, almost lunchtime, so here's your takeaway food as well. Let's move beyond words, okay? Now we know it's not just about speech, especially when we're saying speech therapy. Please start thinking about communication therapy and not just speech in terms of words. All communication is valid, verbal, non-verbal, written, AAC, whatever it is, body language, facial mimics, all of it. Neuro-affirming approaches aren't just kind, they're effective, they're essential, they're needed. They are, I dare say, a must. And I don't think any other way should be the case, really. And together we can reshape the way we can support autistic communicators. Thank you so much for listening to this not so long, but hopefully interesting talk. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now and allow you guys to answer any question, to ask any question so that I can answer it. Sorry, guys, this is my sickness and allergy affecting my brain a bit. See, I can also be dysregulated. All right, I'm gonna open the chat. Okay, I can see Amira mentioned the clothes bags that she cannot stand. Anyone has any specific question? I know you guys asked me a lot of things in the forms that you filled. If you still have questions that you think I did not answer and you think this is the right opportunity to ask it, please go ahead. Thank you, Carla. At what age do we do assessments, and how can I differentiate ADHD from autism? I would say the scientific way to do it is according to the DSM-5, really, and this is how we can really differentiate. But if you want my experience as a therapist, they're quite different. However, they can come together. A lot of the times, an autistic child can also have ADHD, but I would say the main difference is the communication. The communication, especially the nonverbal communication. Children on the spectrum sometimes may have a hard time understanding humor, may have a hard time understanding figure of speech, pragmatic social skills. All of these are a bit different for a child who has ADHD. At what age we do assessment, it depends on, well, if you talk about autism assessment, which is usually the ADOS, the CARS, we have different assessment tools that we use. Usually it's a psychologist or psychiatrist or someone who is trained in that assessment, they would do it. Usually not before the age of 2, I would say a bit more. And honestly, if you want my experience, I usually would not do an assessment before doing at least 6 months of therapy, because there's a lot of difference between how the child is behaving and communicating before and after therapy. That sometimes is just a lack of opportunities that the child didn't have to develop that communication, and it will affect their assessment results. So I would say start with not just focusing on the labeling and is my child on the spectrum or not. Start by understanding what they're having difficulties with and tackling that. And if you still want the assessment, which is a lot of the time just for us to understand what's happening. A lot of the times it's also for social security and insurance purposes and legal stuff and all of that. Then definitely I would say after 6 months of therapy, after the age of 2.5, this is where we can actually start doing the assessments. Thank you, Hannah. What is your opinion on the use of flashcards at home to introduce new words? I've been hearing mixed reviews on it. It helps my child to learn new words, which we then incorporate into daily language with plenty of gesturing to understand the context of the word. So thank you for using the word context, because this is important. I personally, I'm not a big fan of flashcards. I did not learn to speak with flashcards. I don't think this is a natural way of learning how to speak. Plus, it will be very prompt based. So a lot of the times I get kids who have a very wide range of expressive vocab, but are they really understanding the word? One, are they really able to use that word in their daily life? Three, are they really able to know that dog is not that dog that I saw on the flashcard? It's every dog that I see in my daily life. So putting it in context is important. It doesn't have to be through flashcards. It can be through toys, through playing, which is the ideal way to introduce a word to the child while you are, I don't know, helping them get dressed, helping them shower. These are amazing opportunities to introduce a lot of vocab, a lot of words. You want to teach them animals, take them to the zoo, read them a book, whatever it is, where you're actually introducing that word in a more, let's say, appropriate context, or a more functional context. Okay. My child is unwilling to enter any training center for therapy. Any advice? I'm not sure I can give you a very direct advice, because it depends of why they are unwilling to enter. It depends on their age. It depends on the previous experiences. I don't know if they had a bad experience in a previous center and they're refusing to do that again. I don't know if it's a more separation anxiety. They don't want to be separated for their caregiver. So it depends on why they are refusing to enter, and how old they are, and what's the level of understanding as well. Like, how can you really explain and kind of motivate them to go to the training center. But it also depends on the connection that they had with the therapist in the center. Sometimes there's chemistry, sometimes there's a click, sometimes there's not, and that's okay. But it's important to provide a safe environment for the child. Otherwise, as we said, they're going to be dysregulated, and when they're dysregulated, they're not going to be able to learn or be involved, be interacting, engaging with the therapist. So it's important to make sure you find the right place for the child, but it's also important to understand why they are not willing to enter the therapy center. You're welcome, Rabia. Nida, techniques to reduce mood swings in autistic teenagers. Thank you for the session. So as we said, we replaced the word mood swings with regulation. I mean, sometimes it is my mood, but I would say it's mostly, am I regulated or am I dysregulated? So it's important to understand what's causing that dysregulation. And I would say based on that, you can try to find methods to regulate, and that will help them reduce those mood swings. But also sometimes it's important to understand that we are not always at our bests, right? Like, I'm not always smiling and happy and cheerful. I'm not always, I don't know, at my best mood. Sometimes I'm tired. Sometimes I didn't sleep well. Sometimes, but again, it's important to consider it from a regulation and dysregulation perspective. Then there is just mood swings. It's just the hormones. It's just whatever it is. Okay. Qasim, of course, you can ask another question. Please feel free. Samantha, thank you so much for the valuable insight. You're welcome. Sometimes we tend to overlook the most simple forms of communications by our children. Taking a moment to pause and actually pay attention to what our child is trying to communicate to us definitely will help us in supporting them better. Thank you so much, Samantha. I completely agree with you. And it's also important not to force the child when they are not ready. I'll give you a simple example we didn't really have time to talk about, which is eye contact. I know a lot of us might be uncomfortable if the child is not directly looking at us in the eye and they were like, look at me, look at me. No, we're forcing them to look at you. They will look at you eventually. But first of all, the second you're not prompting them to look at you, they will not look at you. Second of all, as we previously said, if you are forcing them to do something they are not comfortable with, all their focus will be on looking at you, but you're going to lose them on a communication perspective. Okay, they will look at you, but they will not be communicating with you. Or even worse, they'll be like gazing at you because they don't know what's looking at you and what you actually want from them, which sometimes can be a bit awkward or a bit inappropriate. So eye contact will come from intrinsic motivation, again, if the child is ready for it, if it's not too dysregulating on a visual level for them to look at you in the eyes. Okay, so we don't want to dysregulate them by forcing them to look at you, and by dysregulation we will lose the communication. My son is 5 and non-speaking. We have been using Protocol to Go since he was 3, and he also uses his Talker iPad at school. I find it difficult to model at home as I think he sees it as a demand being placed on him. Any tips for modeling without expectations? Model without expectations. That's my tip. Don't force him. Don't. It should not be a demand. The device or whatever the tool that you're using can be next to you, and while you're playing, you can use it yourself to kind of model what you're saying on the iPad, since in this case it's Protocol to Go, and then don't use it as a way to, just like you're not forcing the child to say a word, don't force the child to point at a word, okay? It's the same thing. So use it without expectation. Let the child feel that it's not something I'm forced to do. It will come more naturally as it should be. And another tip I would give you is that be patient, because it's important to know that the child isn't always ready also to use the device whatsoever. Maybe it's the wrong app, maybe it's the wrong timing, maybe it's the wrong whatever it is. So just be patient with that. Keep the device next to you as a support for the language that you are saying, and don't necessarily have expectations, but it will come more naturally from the child with time. Marianne, many, many thanks, Lise, for this beautiful, insightful talk. Hoping to see more clinicians, therapists, parents, and teachers following a strength-based neuroaffirming approach. I agree. Marianne is also a psychologist and was a dear colleague of mine who also uses the same approach. And I think more and more people are starting to realize the importance of acceptance more than just being aware, right? We talked about autism awareness versus autism acceptance. Really accepting our child and their and his or her differences, rather than forcing them to behave or to be or to say certain things in a certain way. Okay, Marlene is already sending the reviews. I think that's my that's my cue to stop talking. Again, I shared my email, so please, if anyone has further questions, please go ahead and ask them. Otherwise, I think that is it from my side. Thank you so much once again. I hope I answered your questions, and I hope that was beneficial for you. And have a good rest of the day.